also joined. Hello. Okay, so then let's start. So we have 40 participants, I think, back from the lunch break. I'm very glad that we have now the opportunity to introduce the first speaker of the afternoon. Antoniya Georgieva. I hope the pronunciation is okay. And well, in the discussions, well, we had some ideas about the title of the talk, and I think the title is great. In essence, it says, well, what happened in the area of interest in Oxford in the past and nowadays, and what's going to be the future. And so I'm very excited now to listen to your talk, Antoniya, and so the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin, for the kind invitation. As I was saying, I really enjoyed the morning. It was different than my usual days or conferences, so actually was great. Thank you to all the speakers. I hope you can see my slides.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so this is the title that Martin gave me. Blame him. So very modest, computerized fetal monitoring, or CTG in particular, at Oxford, in particular, past, present, and future. So I'm Antoniya. I'm an associate professor leading the Oxford Labour Monitoring Group. So the challenge and the reason why I'm in this field is that we continue to have the only one vital sign for the fetus in utero, and that's the heart rate of the baby. Nowadays, we could get ECG with certain technologies, but largely we have no access to anything to do with their temperature, blood pressure, perfusion, unfortunately. So we are quite stuck technology-wise. The question of how is the baby doing, and in particular during labor, has been, because labor is very stressful to the baby more than to the mother in terms of physiology. And people have been listening to the heartbeat of the baby already years ago with this well-established PINART, for example. In the UK, where I'm based, we monitor with this handheld Doppler about 40% of all births at term. They are deemed low risk when there hasn't been any reason during pregnancy to consider them at risk. And then during labor, if there isn't anything specifically going wrong, they would continue to be classed as low risk. So this is kind of something you manually hold to the abdomen of the laboring woman and listen to the heartbeat, in particular interesting after contraction, because you want to ask the question, how is the baby coping, and did this contraction, which normally reduces the blood flow, was it tolerated well with the baby? And in many countries, in many developed countries, most pregnancies are actually monitored with a continuous fetal monitor, which is, this is me, my first labor, in case you want to know, which is a bit bigger monitor, and that provides this continuous graph, which here we are seeing only 30 minutes, but of course labor can be 10 hours, 20 hours. So sometimes these paper strips can be actually really long. I am as tall as 2.5 hours of paper. So if you have 10 hours labor, you're talking about a lot of paper. So what you're looking at is the fetal heart rate. The maternal pulse sometimes is detected when deemed necessary by the clinicians, and these are the contractions, right? And for that you have 2 bouts. And in the UK we monitor about 60% of all births continuously with these monitors, and this is the focus of my main research so far. That's the CTG. These graphs So they are clearly quite difficult to assess by eye. It is well known that there are lots of limitations with these technologies. It's been in use for about 40 to 50 years now in developed world. As I said, in some countries almost uniformly, but it comes with a lot of drawbacks. Unfortunately, we have nothing else ongoing, so we're a little bit stuck. And what I'm focused on is trying to make the best out of these graphs. So some of the main limitations is that they can be quite long, difficult to assess by eye, a lot of interpersonal and intrapersonal variation. But there is a major limitation with the fact that it's just one signal, a heart rate. It's just not telling you enough about the physiology. Fetuses are really good at protecting themselves against oxygen deprivation, and they can show signs of distress but still do well, and the false positive rate is quite high. The technology struggles with, you can see signal gaps, signal noises, mistaken signals, and so on. These are well established and known problems. So as a result, so this is a slide I'm going to go very quickly through. It's UK focused, but as a result, in the UK and in other countries, I mean, some countries are doing better. And I think next talk, I'm looking forward to the next speaker who will speak from such country in the Scandinavian peninsula. But in the UK and in all countries generally, it still continues to be a problem. If a baby is not taken care of on time during labor, it can sustain brain injury. You can see here a neonate undergoing therapeutic hypothermia, which is lowering the body's temperature to try to reduce the effect of that cell death that happens in the brain in particular. For us, it's a huge problem in the UK financially as well. We have a National Health Service. A massive part of the litigation bill goes for taking care of such babies. So even though the number is very small, the cost is big, and that's good in a sense that it's a very good place in the UK now to work in this field, because it's a national priority to reduce the number of such injuries any way we can. To the past, I found it very difficult to arrange this talk as past, present, and future. They do blur. The lines are quite blurred. But going through the past, I'll start with data. One of the most important things for where I am is our data. And we collect routinely all of the maternity data in my hospital in Oxford, which is quite a big hospital. We have about 7,500 deliveries a year. So since 1993, Professor Chris Redman set up the technology and ability and the clinical insight to actually be collecting not only the digital CTGs, but also all of these things that relate to the pregnancy, the labor, and the outcome of the baby, which then allows us now to be doing modern machine learning or statistical models or deep learning, if you wish, or anything we want. We start with data. So when I wanted to talk about the past, I had to talk about Chris Redman. He's a physician. He was the boss on level 6 in our hospital, caring for the women with preeclampsia, which the decision had to be made. So these are usually premature babies, and you don't want to really induce labor or deliver them when it's not time. So you monitor them quite actively. And Chris Redman was one of the first around, especially at Oxford, to apply this technology, the fetal monitor, continuously to ask the question, okay, is this baby coping okay? Not in labor, right? So these are, as I was saying, usually premature babies. The women are not in labor, but they do have preeclampsia, and you need to make a decision. Should you take the baby out, or can it stay another day or another week? I mean, every week matters. So this is kind of the background of, he did a lot of work in the 80s with Professor Dawes, and then I had the pleasure to work briefly with Mrs. Mary Moden, who was the programmer, the engineer behind. Remember, Chris is a physician. So kind of these are the principles around the look a baby at 36 weeks, or antenatal monitoring, as we would call it, or antepartum or pre-labor. So what is interesting is not only that Chris started collecting all that data, had the programmer Mary Moden to have algorithms to mine that data. We're talking about the 80s and early 90s, at a time where this kind of concepts didn't exist. So he also put it in a software computer, and it's now commercially available already for 30 years, I think, or close, under a license with Huntley Healthcare. Right, and there's a nice video Huntley did more recently here, the link at the bottom. So I know a lot of people who may be present today here or not can feel quite strongly for and against, usually against, a lot of the things that have been going around with the dose regimen. But talking about a past, I had to talk about that. The dose regimen is the system which is based on these antepartum principles. So that's where I'm coming from. So I joined in 2007 when Chris Redman gave me all of the intrapartum or labor archives. They were in binary files. They were in a very poor state, so no one before me had been working with the labor data. It comes from the labor ward or the triage admission unit, so it's a completely different data set from the one that Chris Redman's used for the dose Redman. And as such, I'm a completely independent researcher. Conflict of interests out. Obviously, we do maintain close relationship and we share members of staff and we share office space, but what I do, it's completely independent for the for disclosure. So what I do is what I'm leading is ultimately the goal is to have a software for labor. Labor is very complicated, much more complicated than before labor. So what we have, what I sit on is about 100,000 births data. So these are babies at term, women that are in labor, and the goal is to use modern techniques like deep learning, prognostic models, as well as clinical risk factors, expert opinion, and provide decision support software for individualized risk assessment during labor. So just a general taste of what working with this kind of data means. One very important step that took forever was actually to define the outcomes of interest. That continues to be a big problem in our field. What are we trying to prevent? What is preventable? What is a valid outcome that CTG can be linked to or not? These are actually still not known very well. But if I take a big cohort, a subset of mine, where I have all of that data, I can split the groups into exclusive groups of very unwell, moderate, and very well. And the reason why you have to do that a lot is because you have a lot of intervention. So when you work with routinely collected data, you have the data censorship paradox, right? So in the interest of time, I'll skip, but one of the biggest things I've done is actually creating this graph, which is looking at the cohort and saying, okay, if we have these exclusive groups from very unwell babies, severe problems, to very normal babies, pink and kicking with no signs of even remotely of acidemia in blood. And we look at the percentage of these babies that were delivered in clinical care by the doctors because of presumed fetal compromise, largely because of the CTG. So how often, so these are all monitored births. Obviously, I cannot work with the data for those that were not monitored with CTG. So how often did the doctors react by doing a cesarean section emergency or forceps or ventouse? And that's what the graph you emerge, which is, so you see a clear titration. The worse the outcome, the more intervention, the more the doctors realized and intervened. That's what you want to see. But what you see as well is what we know, is just we're the first ones to put a number on it because we have the data, is the false positive rate. So in these very normal babies, about 16%, about a third of those are cesarean sections, which is more risky and more expensive and worse. And forceps or ventouse, which is also no walk in the park. Are about 60% of those. And you can see you can start talking about sensitivity in clinical care. Obviously, these are missed opportunities. Some of these babies, some of these compromises are not preventable. Anyways, in interest of time, talking about the past, what that graph allows me is to then do this graph, and that's well published and established now, starting to have algorithms and have a benchmark to compare these algorithms. And that was really a breakthrough to be able to convey this to obstetricians and to data scientists who were not ready for this kind of research 10 years ago. Now it's a different climate because of big data and AI. So thank you to everyone in big data and AI for making it now possible to talk about using routinely collected data for software. So 10 years ago was extremely difficult to publish papers and push in this field. It's just you couldn't publish your papers, let alone get funding, because everyone was saying you cannot use that data to learn from. Now we are in a better state. So this is very, very basic. However, that's a very important result. Still being able to have a benchmark and saying, okay, now we are working to optimize our algorithms to get that graph higher up and this one lower up, down. Simple. I'm going to skip through this in the interest of time, but it is in the paper. so one of this Oxys 1.5 is a version of the algorithm, and it has this result well published, and it's very, very basic. It's based just on one parameter really of the CTG. In terms of computational elements, it's not complex. What I'm proud is of a recent paper where we actually applied the same parameter from the CTG that we have been working with, comparing directly to the blood pressure of that fetus. Unfortunately, we have that data only for animal experiments, because in the human baby, as I said, we have no other vital signs. But you can see something that you've developed with human data, we've optimized with human data. You can go and put in a very limited sets of animal data where you have a lot more, and you can see a very good correlation. So, of course, we are doing now this deep learning things. As obstetricians like to ask me these days, do you do this AI thing as well? So, yes, we do that AI thing as well. It's still for early steps. So, this is a published paper if you want to look at it. In terms of the present, so all of this past has allowed me now to actually get substantial funding to finally start building a team. I have stopped having babies myself, so I can hopefully have a little bit more time to work. So this is my current present team that I'm very proud of. I've just recruited over the last 10 months, online mostly. It was a very difficult process. No one told me it's so difficult to recruit and manage people. We have some of the main collaborations that I'm most proud of are obviously the hospitals within the UK, which is an increasing network, where we hope to have first tests of our algorithms, but also where we're getting data from, and animal studies that are coming from Auckland and Oslo University. I'll mention that a bit later. We see a lot of key challenges. I'll skip through that now. So this is what we are doing at the moment. We are doing that AI and deep learning, but we are also using the animal data to learn from statistical prediction models, time series, clinical risk factors, biomarkers as well. With Oslo, we have a good collaborations into looking at biomarkers in maternal blood. So all of these things is what I'm looking into in different ways, and all of them are linking into that software app, of which we have a working prototype, which works in our hospital, and it can work in quite other few hospitals as well, depending on how it hooks up to the monitors. So we are working now increasingly with this app as a research tool to improve its interface, to make sure it's usable, and also to start initial tests. So what the future holds is, of course, remember, we want to get these bar charts higher up in a simplistic way. So we are doing all of these things to improve the algorithms in terms of sensitivity and specificity as we speak. But here I've added this at the bottom. A very important step for us is external validation, getting more and more data from more and more external places. The more diverse data, the better, before we have to do clinical trial. Obviously, we will do large-scale clinical trials. I'm setting up, gearing up towards a trial in UK, but I think it might be totally reasonable to do EU-wide. So I'm actually open for that. I don't have enough time to really invest at the moment for these things. We are not quite ready, but I think that might be. I have a lot of hospitals from the UK, from Europe, who like to collect their data, who like to be part of this, who are very strongly keen. Of course, commercialization is something that I am keen to speak to Martin more. It's a big question mark. We are fully academic so far. We cannot continue to be fully academic forever. There's a lot of problems around that, I would say. And very much focus of what I do at the moment is usability and trust. Okay, fantastic algorithms. How do we give that within the busy delivery world in a way that midwives and doctors and all kind of the range in between use it effectively? So the future. In terms of CTG, so I wanted to mention, so Oslo professor staff and pay, I love to say this, staff pay, have secured a very good grant from the Norwegian Council, which is going to be looking in quite a few things around integrating the data flows within the hospital and being able to do home monitoring. And that's something that it's definitely, as I've spoken to Martin before, is something I would love to support. Obviously, it's the future, so I'm looking forward to next talk. It's not something I can drive or work on, but our softwares, both those Redmond and mine, would sit very well on any of these devices. And I've just listed here a few. I put Trium because I know you're interested in this. I don't know what's going on, but I think the future is in wearable fetal monitoring. Definitely, someone needs to do it. What I'm interested a lot is low resource settings. There are quite a few monitors for that. Obviously, you need to be able to do the cesarean section. So, you know, you can't really talk about bringing that technology somewhere where they don't have the theater or the hospital setting. But there is plenty of countries where they do have a hospital setting, but again, the triage is the most important thing. Who do you need to prioritize to? You don't have enough midwives, you don't have clinical personnel, you have a theater, you could perform cesarean section. And this is, I've been privileged to work with some of the data that Ledrao collect, but there's other devices, obviously. I just mentioned Ledrao because they're my favorite. Another very big question I would say that I'm very interested is, okay, the future should be going definitely through asking what are the different pathways to fetal brain injury during labor. We do not understand the physiology. People may pretend they do, but the reality is we just don't know how you end up with that unwell baby. And until we do that, we cannot be better with our technologies because we are kind of shooting in the dark. We are working with very heterogeneous data sets. So I'm interested in that as well. And there's lots of versions of this figure. So final note I would say is that new technology to allow other vital signs. I know there are young researchers, aspiring researchers on this conference today and students. So I always say this message, fantastic, these are basic 20th century tools. We need 21st century tools. Yeah, I have some ideas, but I think generally it's a very open space there. We need more. And final slide, I would say the future, in the near future, we will be taking our biennial Spam in Labor workshop, which is a very intense 2.5 day of very active discussions and collaborations between doctors, engineers, commercial people as well. So we'll be taking it to Technical University of Munich. Thank you, Martin, for that. So if you want to join, the registration is open until mid-May. Difficult to do that slide. Thank you for the team and the funders, and thank you.
Antoniya, thank you so much for this very stimulating talk. I mean, a bright future is out there, I think. Now, I'm sure there are a couple of comments or questions from the group. We have an entire block on obstetrics now coming. So let's see. Klaus, you just...
Yeah, just a quick question. Because you had in your slides, you were talking about applying deep learning somewhere in the chain of things. I'm not just wondering if you're in a medical environment, are you also addressing questions of explainability or transparency?
Yep. So this is a number one question, one of many number ones. So I am known to be a little bit annoying in that field, especially within my team, because I do not support the idea of us putting deep learning. We also don't have the data for it to begin with, to put in deep learning methods and say, there you go, use it. I'm totally against that notion. So what we are doing at the moment is I'm focused on developing the deep learning methods really only for segments of the CTG itself, even only heart rate, because the contraction signal is sometimes causing us more problems even. So even if you look at segments of the CTG, relate this to what we already know, but we are having some promising results. So it's not a miracle solution, but the deep learning models, when you control them carefully, are able now to pick up in the heart rate only more than I'm able to pick up with the STVs, the baselines, and the standard things. So you want to use that, but the way my vision for now, it might change, is that you use this within the understanding of a regression model. So it becomes one metric that reads the heart rate, but it's nowhere near involved in the solution of AI saying to you, cut or not cut. Okay. Obviously, I might change my opinion. My deep learning postdocs do not like that. They think they'll just put everything in the deep learning model and come up with an AI that says, okay, I think the data is not good enough. Once we are in the millions, once we have more tools, maybe we'll be able to do some of these things. But as of the moment, I think we are safe with just putting it in the clinical risk factors context,
It's also a question of acceptance.
Exactly.
Acceptance by the clinicians. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so let's hand over to a clinician. Olaf, you have raised your hand.
Thank you, Antoniya, for a fantastic talk. It was really so interesting. We have to meet. So, but maybe
I agree.
So maybe we'll meet in July. But just a brief question. Do you think that this AI-based decision support has the same place in antenatal CTG as in intrapartum CTG?
Yes, yes, you need the data and you need the team to, it's not very quick or easy. So you need, yeah. Yeah, so you mean about antenatal CTG,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So yeah, so because we are independent with Chris Redman, so again, that's something that politically it is not, and I am also very busy. And also the highest gain for me is labor anyway. So that's not something I dip my toes in. But Chris Redman should be doing it, right? And they are trying. So they have a student who's coming to Munich in July who is looking into it. It's not quick or easy, and the data is key. But yeah, they should be doing it. It should be done. It can give you something extra. I think the deep learning, not massive though, but it can give you extra to the classic baseline STV. So, and then every little counts. It's probably not so little. But yes,
So
someone has to do it.
so I have a question or a comment, some a mixture. So it's very good to see that now in the UK there is funding available to make this kind of complex research possible, and this in light of somehow devastating Cochrane reviews that have, as everyone knows in this field, that somehow the best evidence, people think the best quality evidence is Cochrane reviews, and they continued over years and years and years. When they assessed the technology, they came to the conclusion, you are increasing the false alarm rate and don't change anything else. So that means you lead to unnecessary interventions, and that cause, well, at the end, death for babies and pregnant women. And obviously, the data and the information that has happened or has been published in the meantime has convinced the reviewers of whatever ground you have submitted to say, well, we believe that this is going to change. And that's, I think, a very good signal for the field and hopefully also for other countries. Yeah.
Mm. Thank you. I think it's been a lot down to me, to be honest. I have convinced, so I have actually worked tirelessly for over 10 years. I was more than 10 years ago when I went to, I remember Chris Redman, we were still working more together, and Aris Papageorgiou, who is someone as well at Oxford and London, don't know if you've heard the name. He's more into ultrasound and applying AI for ultrasound during pregnancy. But I remember sitting them in the office and going, you guys, you need to stop this. You know, you have one postdoc here and you think, you know, that's not going to happen. This is, you need big teams to be addressing this. I'm drowning. I'm brilliant, but I'm drowning. And we need a mind shift. And I sat them down and said, you need to work on a mind shift. So 10 years from now, when obstetricians hear about that thing, I don't want them going, oh, CTG doesn't work. Reject, you know, they need to be thinking, oh, that's an opportunity. And I worked tirelessly and I achieved that mind shift. The boom with AI helped, because now on a government level, they've decided to invest a lot in AI. And I was just looking today in the press as well, another project that I've shared an office with for years, Sally Collins, she's doing AI again on the ultrasound, in particular for 12-week scans, so very early scans of the placenta. And I remember 10 years ago when she was doing that research, and she's an obstetrician, and it was obnoxious, it was outrageous, you know. And we supported each other, and she's having her first use of her scan next week, first recruit in the UK. So I think the climate changed for all of us, and I'm like, yay, we did it, we survived. The climate change, but it's really the mind shift in obstetricians. I mean, it might sound rough, but another thing, I mean, I'm known to be annoying, but another thing I've been saying at some point is, you know, older obstetricians are dying out, which is in some ways good. I'm sorry to say that. If they are not stepping down, then, you know, there is a moment, and it's the same with me in, say, 10 years, where I think the technology changes so fast, the algorithms change so fast, that we need to be kind of paving the way for the younger generations to come with fresh thoughts.
Yeah, and you're in good company. I mean, Max Planck, I mean, said the same thing. I mean, new theories and new concepts don't flourish because you can convince the enemy.
I took it from him. I didn't invent it. I played it.
Wait until they're out. So, Uwe, I mean, you have your hands up.
Yes, thank you for your talk. Being one of these pre-final old obstetricians, I would like to have a follow-up question to Olaf's comment, antenatal versus intrapartum monitoring, because the old obstetricians know that you can change the pH with a mismanagement within the last 5 or 10 minutes of a delivery. So the outcome of a delivery not necessarily says something about the surveillance technique during intrapartum. And therefore, the more stable physiological situation is antepartum. And the question is whether cesarean section rate is such a good outcome parameter for many reasons, because if you go back to the data sets, you might not have the indication precisely recorded, which would hold review if you go into detail. But I want to rephrase the question. You said antepartum monitoring, you don't see so much potential, where I would hope that we can kind of set the tracks for different risk categories much earlier.
Okay, yeah, no, I agree completely. It was a little bit of a rush statement thinking about deep learning for CTG itself. Yeah, no, I agree completely. The risk assessment, from everything I see in the data, that initial risk assessment, as I said, fetus, as we know, very well able to cope. So the question is that the art is knowing which fetus has the healthy placenta, the healthy core, the healthy fetus itself, the healthy mother and blood flow, that then you don't worry so much, even if they're having bad CTGs. So I think the risk assessment is a huge, the initial, the antepartum. So yeah, no, I retract that statement. I was thinking about deep learning for CTG antepartum, but the whole picture, including CTG, how they progress, if you now have home monitoring, I mean, we don't know. So yeah, no, I agree completely. You want a holistic approach, ideally.
Because from the other side, we consider more than 70% of pregnancy in Germany to be high risk, because we tick one mark at one of the relevant parameters. On the other hand, fortunately, we don't have 70% high risk deliveries. So I think in the past, we always try to identify the ones at risk, but from a economical and medical economical point of view, it could be also an idea to make sure that the ones who are put in the category no risk have no false or very little rate of false positives, and we can treat them with a much lighter protocol than we treat them today. So right now, everybody gets basically everything, which draws resources which are needed in other areas, or should be focused in other areas. That's the reason why antepartum might has a potential.
It has a huge potential. No, listen, I'll bring back to this about the technology. Listen, okay, we don't have the technology to be more certain. So everything is risk assessment. And no matter what AI you put on CTG, it's not going to be diagnostic. So because we are dealing with risks, any information is useful, because you want to be, stratifying. I'll shut up.
Okay. So thank you.
Thank you.
We will have more time for discussions, but because we stay somehow now in the field, and I